What's up, y'all? My name is JR, and for those of you who don't already know, I'm a huge movie and TV nerd. If you're new here, I appreciate you taking the time to check out my channel. I hope you'll consider sticking around and joining the film community I'm trying to build here on YouTube. So in today's video, I'm going to be talking about the Netflix crime drama series, Ozark, why I thought the ending was bad, and what I thought the ending should have been instead. And just so you guys know, this video will contain spoilers, so if you haven't gotten around to watching this show yet, and you don't want to know anything that happens in it, you might want to exit this video now. And with that being said, no more wasting time. Let's get into it. Ozark is an American crime drama television series created by Bill Dubuque and Mark Williams for Netflix, and produced by MRC Television and Aggregate Films. The series stars Jason Bateman and Laura Linney as Marty and Wendy Bird, a married couple who moves their family to the Lake of the Ozarks to continue their work laundering money for a Mexican drug cartel. Bateman also serves as a director and executive producer for the series. The first season of Ozark was released on July 21st of 2017. The second season was released on August 31st of 2018, and the third season was released on March 27th of 2020. The first three seasons are 10 episodes each. In June of 2020, the series was renewed for a fourth and final season consisting of 14 episodes split into two parts. The first part was released on January 21st of 2022, and the second was released on April 29th of 2022. Now, Ozark has received positive reviews from critics throughout its run, with particular praise for its tone, directing, production value, and performances, particularly those of Bateman, Linney, and Julia Garner. The series has received a total of 45 Primetime Emmy Award nominations, including 3 for Outstanding Drama Series, with Bateman winning for Outstanding Directing for a Drama Series in 2020, and Garner winning 3 times for Outstanding Supporting Actress in a Drama Series in 2019, 2020, and 2022. Bateman has received 2 further Golden Globe Award nominations for Best Actor, Television Series Drama. Now, at the time of the making of this video, the show has an 83% on Rotten Tomatoes, with its popcorn meter currently sitting at 86%. The series has a Metascore of 69 on Metacritic based on 83 critic reviews, with a user score of 8.1 based on 899 user ratings. And finally, the series overall has an 8.5 out of 10 on IMDb, with almost 370,000 ratings. So look, guys, I'm going to start this video by saying that Ozark was a very good show, mostly because of the performances of Jason Bateman, Laura Linney, and Julia Garner. But also because it was a unique story, in my opinion, one that was fairly well written for the most part, and it was made by some of the same people who made Bloodline, another Netflix original that was made a few years before. And you can absolutely tell by the tone and the look and the feel of the show that there were a lot of hands involved in both shows. Now, I thought the characters were interesting. I thought their arcs were fairly well constructed. But the final image was lackluster in my opinion. And I won't lie to you guys, it left me with a really bad taste in my mouth. Now, to talk about why the show's ending was bad, again, in my opinion, we have to first talk about the opening image of the show's final season. That being the Bird family driving down the highway in their minivan, with Marty talking about them going in to meet with the FBI and being 48 hours away from moving back to Chicago, before a semi swerves into oncoming traffic, causing Marty to swerve as well, off the road, flipping the minivan on the side of the highway. Now, the biggest reason I thought this was a bad idea, narratively speaking, is because we don't even get back to this moment until 20 minutes into the series finale. And keep in mind that the last season was split into 2 parts. So it's not like you could just binge watch the whole thing straight through. Literally there were months before we got back to this point in the series because the series was released in 2 parts. And though Wendy appears to take the brunt of the accident, she ultimately ends up walking away from it just fine. My point being that nothing of consequence really happens as a result of this crash. Maybe except, the small task of providing Jonah and Charlotte with a near-death experience, so as to give them a reason to decide to stop being brats and support their mother at their charity event later that day. And again, narratively speaking. But even so, I have to ask, what was the point of this being the first thing we saw in the first episode of the season, right? I can understand them putting it in the trailer to get everybody like, oh crap, a car crash happens. Who lives and who dies, right? Selling the show, I understand. But once we actually get to the show, I'm going like, narratively speaking, what's the point, right? Especially when I first watched this and we do the car crash and then they flash back all the way back to Mexico. And we have to go through this whole song and dance. And like I said, we don't get back to the car crash until literally episode 14 of the season. And I just was like, I don't understand why they did that. That was irritating to me. Also, I have to say that Rachel coming back to run the Missouri Belle for Ruth was just silly from a narrative standpoint, right? It's not even remotely close to something that the character we watched for the last 3 seasons would do, especially given everything she went through previously, right? And we see that when she, gets back, she's talking a lot of noise and, waving her fingers and snapping and yes, queening and whatever. But as soon as Nelson jumps on her in the parking lot, in the backseat of her car, she's all like, don't kill me, don't kill me, don't kill me, right? And then, when she's forced to kind of shoot him when he shows up at the Langmore estate, on that rainy night, after Ruth went to the sheriff to confess about killing Javi, again, she's not about this life, right? And this is the whole thing that had her turned out and running from the Marty and the cartel and the law and all kind of stuff before, right? So I just thought her coming back to do this it was absolutely the last thing that this character would be interested in. Now, the biggest reason, though, I thought the ending was bad is because it literally ends on a cliffhanger. And cliffhangers, let me be clear, are okay for season finales, right? Because they're the very thing that makes you come back and watch the show the next season, but not for series finales, right? When you're about to end the story, I need you to go ahead and end it, boss. You know what I'm saying? In a series finale, you need all of the questions, and certainly the really big questions that the writers have posed to us, the audience, over the course of the series to be answered, preferably without equivocation. And the writers simply chose not to do that here. I mean, does Jonah simply shoot Mel in cold blood in order to keep the birds' secrets and then help the family pack up the U-Haul and head back to Chicago? And if so, what happens then, right? I mean, think about it. Does Charlotte go to college? What do they do after all? And are we just to assume that Camilla with the cartel is just not going to ever be heard from again by the birds? Like that's settled and everybody's just going to leave us alone now? Does the FBI ever come back and go, hey, there's some stuff going wrong, Marty. You might have to dive back in here. You see what I'm saying? Especially with Ruth getting shot, how does the Belle end up in all of this? Like it was too much of an incomplete sentence, if you will, right? Now, not everything about the show, the end of the show was bad, right? I did think that Wendy's dad showing up in the Ozarks looking for his supposedly missing son, only to end up seeking vengeance upon Wendy for what he called shaming the family by trying to convince her children to move to North Carolina with him, was great stuff, right? I thought it raised the stakes for the birds in the 11th hour, which I quite enjoyed. I also thought that the end of Sam's character arc was pitch perfect, right? With him losing his mom and then, ending up, with his, asking a stripper to marry him, only to get broken up with by said stripper because he got a gambling addiction. Him moving to North Carolina to start all over, getting saved and baptized and that kind of thing, I thought that was perfect. Absolutely perfect, right? Because he seemed to be a pretty sweet guy. He just, could easily be taken advantage of. You know what I'm saying? And I thought Ruth being killed by Camilla was perfect, especially within with the few minutes that led up to the event, right, where Marty and Wendy, and by extension their children, were all threatened by her, like, hey, if you so much as warn her, like, I'll kill every single one of y'all, you know what I'm saying? And so that put the Byrdes in a situation where they kind of had to allow Ruth to get killed in order to save themselves and their own children. And I believe that they did what any parents would do there. And believe it or not, I don't actually have a problem with Jonah killing Mel at the end of the show. I just don't think it should have been the final scene and cut to black right after. Now, if I had written the end of the series, again, giving what the story had been up until the point of the end, and what I consider to be the end is essentially maybe the last 2-3 episodes is what I would call the end. You know what I'm saying? The show kind of, tying itself up to go ahead and kind of, finish itself, right? Now, I would have still had Ruth die at the hands of Camilla for the murder of her son, right? And because I would have never brought Rachel back to begin with, if I were the writer on this, this would have left Wendy to run the bell, right? Wendy would have had to stay her happy ass right in the Lake of the Ozarks and run the bell in Ruth's absence, right? Then, and keep that in mind, then I would have had 3 come out of one of the trailers, right, and kill Camilla right after she killed Ruth, right, which would have taken her completely off the board. And, it would have kind of made the whole Langmore curse thing come true in the realest sense of the word, right? Ruth ends up dead, and 3 ends up being a killer, right? And this goes all the way back to the very first or second episode when the Langmores first robbed the Byrdes, and Marty had to follow them out into the middle of the woods or whatever, into that bathroom. And he was just like, look, if y'all going to rob me, you have to ask yourself, are you killers, right? Because you all are going to have to kill each other and stuff like that to keep this money, and the cartel's going to come and they're going to kill you. And are you killers? And by 3 kind of corrupting himself at the last second by, becoming a murderer himself, that would have just tied all the Langmores into that whole deal. And I thought that would have been kind of poetic, if you ask me. Now, after Jonah shoots Mel, I would have had Charlotte and Jonah not necessarily go to North Carolina to be with their grandfather, but I would have had them pack their stuff, well, they were already packed, as Charlotte, so eloquently stated, and move off on their own together. Because if you guys remember when they were hiding in the mausoleum, when they thought that Navarro might go looking for their kids, Charlotte mentioned that if something happened to their parents, that she would want her and Jonah to stay together. But I would have probably had them move someplace new, like California or Florida. That probably would have felt right to me. I would have also still had Omar Navarro die in transport from prison on the orders of the FBI, right? Taking him off the board as well. And finally, I would have had Marty be stuck in Mexico at the head of the cartel for the rest of his life in order to avoid prison time for himself, his wife, and his family. I just think that having Marty be stuck in a life he was fighting so hard to get out of would have been so gut-wrenchingly bittersweet, right? He would get to live. His family would get to live, which would be a minor miracle in and of itself, right? They would all stay out of prison, but Marty would be trapped in a hell of sorts, right? A hell of his own making, right? Because he's the one who chose this life, in pursuit of money. Marty grew up kind of broke. And so that's why he put such a premium on money. And I think that's why he was ultimately able to be convinced to launder money for the cartel in the first place, right? And I think Wendy would be in a similar situation, right? With Marty being gone pretty much all the time and having her children have moved away, she would have been left in that house in the Ozarks all by herself, which I think she would have served her right. Because if you ask me, I see her as the true villain of this show, right? Wendy is a monster. Don't get me wrong, Marty did some things, right? But the things that Marty did seem to at least bother him. You see how with Rachel and with Ruth, he tried to do the right thing when it was at all when it was possible. He would beg and plead people, like, with Ruth, when he asked her not to kill Javi, he's like, don't do this, he must have begged her like 20 times, So he was trying to save her life before it ever got to the point where her life was truly in danger, but she just wouldn't listen. Now, again, I'm not saying that this show wasn't absolutely fantastic, right? If you were to ask me to give the series a rating, I would probably say 8.5 is right around about where I would be at. 80%, 85%, 8.5, you're thinking IMDb score is about where I would come out, right? for all the reasons I've already stated at the beginning of the video, right? The writing was pretty, especially the dialogue was pretty good. I thought the beat by beat progressions over the course of the series, for the most part, was spot on. The acting was amazing, especially by the big three. And I thought I found the story to be interesting, right? It's just the ending feels incomplete. And this show also feels like the kind of show where the ending should be bittersweet, right? Because let's be honest, Ozark was a dark show. Even darker, in my opinion, than Bloodline, which was executive produced and written in part by Chris Mundy. And at least, Bloodline had a colorful South Floridian color palette to kind of balance it out a little bit, instead of the dreary one that set the tone for this show. And, it's funny because people seem to think that Bloodline is the more bleak and less forgiving show of the two shows, with many people stating that they kind of find it difficult to connect with the characters, whereas Ozark, is also being morally complex, offered more opportunities for redemption and a more compelling narrative. And I do agree with that, right? The Birds are offered redemption at the end of this show in a way that the Rayburns are not in Bloodline, right? But I would contend that neither shows close the loop very well, in my opinion. And I would put it like this. It's almost like this show ended with a sentence without any punctuation at the end, right? I mean, look, sure, Ozark at least got us to the point where we can infer what might have happened immediately after the cut to black, whereas Bloodline left the ending way, way up in the air in the episode that ended up being the series finale there. But I can't give Mundy a pass where Ozark is concerned simply because he got us a little closer to the finish line than he did in the show he made before it. Because in my mind, not only did Mundy drop the ball on the ending of Ozark, but in doing so, he missed a chance to have the story mean something in a greater sense, right? What do I always tell you guys? The beginning of your story should tell the audience what the story is about. And the end of your story should tell the audience why you decided to tell the story in the first place, right? I think that Ozark could have made the point that a price had to be paid for the Birds' misdeeds, right? Not so much in that they all needed to go to prison, because sometimes money and power can keep things like incarceration at bay, and the Birds had plenty of both, right? But that from a moral standpoint, they simply had not earned a happy ending. But what do you guys think? Have you had a chance to check out Ozark on Netflix yet? If you have, what did you think about the show's cliffhanger ending? Let me know in the comments. And for those of you that might be new to the channel, be sure to like and share this video. If you really like the content, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. That way you'll be notified whenever I drop a new video. You can also now support the channel by leaving a super thanks. If you should be so inclined, I'd greatly appreciate it. Also, be sure to go and check out themaskscreenwriter.com for more television and film reviews and info on my upcoming film projects. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. I got screenplays to write, and I'll catch y'all on the next video.